Fresh curbs in Maharashtra, stricter ones this time to break the chain. Transport only for emergency use, 15% capacity in government offices and curbs on weddings as well. Strict words from the Delhi High Court to the centre, saying this emergency shows lives don't matter to the government. You take your own sweet time while people die. Government squarely responsible to ensure oxygen supply, also adding that casualties because of no oxygen is that is the centre's responsibility. This at a time when India is nearing 3 lakh cases in one single day. Over 2,000 lives lost as well for the first time in a single day as bodies continue to pile up. Delhi, several bodies burnt up in one single pyre. And in Bengaluru as well, long queues for cremation sites. 24 people die at a hospital in Nashik as oxygen leak happens. State fights for oxygen as hospitals say SOS at this point. Haryana minister says Delhi is looting oxygen as centre finally increases Delhi's quota. Covaxin has 78% efficacy, says the ICMR, also adding that it does work against the new mutant. Covishield to cost 400 rupees a dose to states and 600 rupees a dose to private hospitals. The opposition is asking why the difference in pricing. An election commission rejects Trinamool's request for clubbing the remaining phases of polls, says it's simply not feasible. Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV 24/7. I'm Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor. Let's begin with some news coming in from Maharashtra, which has tightened curbs and brought in more restrictions with the aim to break the chain. The fresh restrictions, will come in from 8 p.m. April 22nd to 7 a.m. on 1st of May. There have been some on transportation as well, which has been allowed only for emergency services, but government offices and also weddings will see now stricter norms. Saurabh Gupta with us for more. Saurabh.
Situation in Maharashtra has shown no signs of going down. Even though Mumbai has reported a drop in figures, statewide the figures continue to rise, and that's something that has worried the government, which is why these new restrictions have come in. Mostly it's a continuation of the old restrictions with tightening of norms further, but on transport, there are several new restrictions, including local trains, which will now be available only to those working in essential services or other categories that have been specified by the government. But all in all, even in buses there are new restrictions. Weddings are going to see new restrictions. Social gatherings are going to see new restrictions, and basically travel, inter-district travel, is also going to see new restrictions. But more importantly, flights and trains that are interstate are going to be allowed to function, so people will be allowed to move out of the state, unlike the first lockdown that the country saw. But more restrictions coming into effect, given that the COVID situation is still far from over and the crisis is still far from over.
All right, so thanks for joining us with the latest. More curbs coming in. Remember, today was the time when the Chief Minister was supposed to take a call on a complete lockdown, 15 days. That was a recommendation that had gone in from the cabinet ministers. But there seems to be a rethink on that front. No permanent and no more severe lockdown, but fresh curbs which have been added to the list. And the Delhi High Court came down quite hard on the centre today over oxygen supply to hospitals in the national capital. It said in its interim order that the centre must ensure unobstructed passage for tankers. The matter has been adjourned till 3 p.m. on Thursday now. But if there are any casualties because of no oxygen, it will be the responsibility of the centre. That's what the High Court has said. Also adding that government squarely that is, the central government is squarely responsible to ensure oxygen supply. This at a time when Delhi is desperate for oxygen, gasping for breath really, as several hospitals have now been calling in for SOS supply, left with barely a few hours of oxygen left with them. The High Court also said that why is it that the centre is not waking up to the reality? How is the government so oblivious to the reality on ground? You can't have people die because there is no oxygen. This emergency shows lives don't matter for the government. And this indeed when India is in middle of an oxygen crisis. India at the moment is in an oxygen emergency. One can call it that as well. On top of that today, sadly, we saw some states battling each other over oxygen supply. Several hospitals in Delhi gave us at NDTV SOS calls saying that their oxygen supply tankers were held up at the Delhi borders. Why? Because allegedly, UP and Haryana does not want to share oxygen with Delhi.
मैं रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ, केजरीवाल से हाथ जोड़ के रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ, मेरा परिवार चला गया, किसी और का परिवार ना जाए। इस अस्पताल को, इस क्या दिल्ली के किसी भी अस्पताल को, हिंदुस्तान के किसी भी अस्पताल को, सबको कोई सा भी हॉस्पिटल हो, सबके अंदर ऑक्सीजन पूर्ति करे और इंजेक्शन पूरी करे, वरना अनर्थ हो जाएगा, अनर्थ हो जाएगा।
Suresh Gupta lost his 46-year-old sister-in-law to COVID last night as she gasped for oxygen.
27,000 के इंजेक्शन ला के मैंने ब्लैक में ढूंढ के ला के दिया उनको। उस रेमडेसिविर, हाँ जी, और वो इंजेक्शन को लगा नहीं। अगर वो इंजेक्शन लगता तो रिकवरी जरूर होती। मेरी रोज पेशेंट से बात हो रही थी, वो यही कह रही है चिल्ला के कि कोई दवाई नहीं मिल रही, ऑक्सीजन नहीं मिल रहा, मैं मर जाऊंगी। आधे घंटे में अभी 8 बोडियां निकली हैं, कल 1 घंटे में 12-13 बोडियां निकली हैं।
GTB hospital officials refused to comment on camera but denied the charges of patients getting affected due to oxygen shortage. With just hours left for their oxygen to run out, several top Delhi hospitals like GTB, Sir Gangaram, LNJP and Max received fresh supplies through the night. But across the government and private hospitals, the supply is not likely to last more than one day. At Delhi's biggest COVID-dedicated hospital, LNJP, at least 1,500 patients are on oxygen out of 2,100 total COVID patients.
अभी हमारा जो डिमांड है 3-4 टन से बढ़ करके 21 टन पे आ गया है। 21 टन ऑक्सीजन हमें रोज चाहिए लोकनायक में। कल रात को हमें बड़ी परेशानी हुई क्योंकि हमारा ऑक्सीजन का जो टैंकर है वो लेट आया। रात को 3 बजे तक मैं पूरी रात में जागता रहा और 3 बजे तक उसका वेट करते रहे, फ़ोन करते रहे कि हमारा जो सेंट्रल सप्लाई है उसका प्रेशर ड्रॉप हो गया। ड्रॉप होने की वजह से हमने 100 से ज़्यादा सिलेंडर यूज किए, तब जाके पेशेंट स्टेबलाइज हुए। रात को फिर हमारे पास 10 टन ऑक्सीजन मिल गई थी, 2 टैंकर हमारे पास आ गए थे। अभी हमें 12 घंटे का बैकअप है, पर आज हमें दिन में 2 टैंकर और आने की संभावना है।
Other hospitals are still struggling.
About 78 patients, corona, and almost all of them need oxygen. We had stock left for about 4 or 5 hours. I have also been in touch with the Delhi Health Secretary. He's been very helpful and cooperative.
Amid this scarcity, the Haryana government today ordered police protection for all tankers, alleging loot by neighbouring Delhi.
और कल हमारा एक टैंकर हमारे फरीदाबाद के अस्पतालों के लिए ऑक्सीजन लेके दिल्ली से जा रहा था। दिल्ली वालों ने, दिल्ली सरकार ने हमारे उस टैंकर को लूट लिया। हालांकि अब मैंने आदेश जारी कर दिए कि जो भी टैंकर जाएगा वो पुलिस एस्कॉर्ट के साथ जाएगा।
The centre today claimed that it has ramped up oxygen production and has resolved the issue of movement of oxygen tankers between Delhi and Haryana. But Delhi's hospitals are still reporting oxygen shortage and there is no long-term strategy in sight. In New Delhi with Sharat Sharma, this is Sukirti Dwivedi for NDTV.
Oxygen shortage in some part of the country. In others, there was an error that led to oxygen being spilled over that took away 24 people's life. Now, oxygen supply got cut out in one of the Nashik hospitals and that led to at least 24 people in that hospital losing their life as the oxygen supply was cut out.
The desperation, the frantic attempts to revive their loved ones, relatives beating on patients' chests as tragically life-saving oxygen just ran out for a crucial 30 minutes.
मम्मी मर गई। क्या हो गया था? कब लाए थे? मेरी माँ को इन्होंने ऑक्सीजन नहीं दिया, तड़प तड़प के मर गई। कब लाए थे उनको? उनको 5 दिन हो गया और रिकवर हो गई थी। अभी ऑक्सीजन नहीं था तो मर गई, तड़प तड़प के मर गई।
The tragedy happened at 12:30 this afternoon when an oxygen tanker refilling the cylinder at the Municipal Corporation Hospital started leaking. Soon, white fumes filled the entire area in this hospital. At the time, there were 150 patients who were on oxygen plus ventilator support. Immediately, the rush began to move them to other hospitals, but for many, it was too late.
उस टाँकी का कॉक डैमेज होने की वजह से सवेरे प्रेशर नीचे आ गया। इस वजह से इन्वेजिव वेंटिलेटर पे जितने भी लोग थे उनको ऑक्सीजन टाइम पे मिला नहीं। इमीडिएटली एक आधे घंटे के अंदर भी शुरू हो गई वो, अभी उसी टाँकी से सप्लाई हो रहा है।
इस घटना की पूरी जानकारी लेके पूरी उसको इंक्वायरी करने के बाद इसके बारे में जो भी दोषी होंगे उस पर कार्रवाई की जाएगी।
The government says there will be a high-level probe and compensation is also being announced. But today, permanent damage done to all those who lost their loved ones because of a human error. With Kishore Belsare in Nashik and Purva Chitnis in Mumbai, Anusya Mathur for NDTV.
At around 12:30 this afternoon at the Zakir Hussain Hospital in Nashik, oxygen leak. Now this was a tanker which had come in to refill the oxygen supply for this hospital which had COVID patients inside it, but around 12:30 when it was refilling, that's when the oxygen leak and white fumes just filled this entire area. And in this tragedy, about 24 people lost their lives. Now that is because when the oxygen leaked, that's when the supply of oxygen was cut off, and that is the reason people who were on ventilator, who were critical, they lost their lives. Now what we understand is that there were this hospital has a capacity of 150 patients, out of which in fact 157 patients were admitted in this hospital, because as we have been reporting, Maharashtra has more patients and there is a bed crisis in Maharashtra as well, and that is why in this particular hospital 157 people were admitted. What we also understand is that once the leakage happened, that's when the fire brigade were rushed to the spot, and then within an hour or so the oxygen was in fact, the leak was plugged, and then about 25% of oxygen was refilled, and then the oxygen supply was restored to this hospital. Now the government has ordered a high-level inquiry into this. What exactly happened? What was the human error? What caused this leakage? All these are a point of inquiry there. This is a part of investigation, and the government has also announced 5 lakh compensation to each victim and their families, and in fact even the corporation has announced the 5 lakh compensation as well.
To Karnataka now, where over 23,000 new cases have been reported in the past 24 hours. It's the highest so far. The positivity rate at the moment is above 15%, and over 13,000 cases have come in from Bengaluru alone. And with Karnataka firmly in the grip of a second wave of COVID-19, even with a relatively low mortality rate, the number of those dying has obviously increased. Waiting for hours at crematorium grounds has only increased the stress of the bereaved. The state government now forced to allot fresh land outside cities and villages to be used as temporary cremation grounds.
Even saying goodbye is harder during the fierce second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. In Bengaluru, relatives wait for hours for the cremation of their loved ones.
ನಾವು ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗೋಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿಗೆ 1:30 ನೈಟು, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸುಡೋಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿಗೆ ನೆನ್ನೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಸುಡೋಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿಗೆ 12 ಗಂಟೆ ಆಯ್ತು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ದು 28ನೇದೋ 29ನೇದೋ ಬಾಡಿ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಬಾಡಿ 12 ಗಂಟೆ ಆಯಿತು. ನಾವು ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಸ್ನಾನ ಮಾಡಿ 2 ಗಂಟೆ ಆಯಿತು.
ತೊಂದರೆ ಏನಿಲ್ಲ. ಈಗ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಪೇಷಂಟ್ ಕಾಯ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಒಂದು ಆಯಿತು, ಈಗ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ನಮ್ಮದೇ ಇರೋದು ಕ್ಯೂ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ನೀವು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಲ್ಲ, ಟೋಕನ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇದು ಮಾಡಿ.
And so the state government is setting up emergency cremation grounds to cope with the extra demand.
Already DC is on the work, so borewell, electric point and water facility, everything, all infrastructure will be temporarily. This is the land for temporary, for the burning for COVID.
ಭಾರಿ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಸರ್, ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಮಾಡಿರೋದು ಭಾರಿ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಕೆಲಸ. ತನ್ನ ಹಳ್ಳಿಯವ್ರು ಬಂದಾದರೂ ಮಕ ಆದರೂ ನೋಡಿ ಒಂದು ಇದು ಅಂತ್ಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರಕ್ಕೆ ಭಾರಿ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸರ್ಕಾರದಿಂದ ಮಾಡಿರೋದು ಭಾರಿ ಉತ್ತಮವಾದ ಕೆಲಸ. ಅದು ಕ್ಯೂ ಸುಮಾರು ನಮ್ಮದು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಮೊದಲೇ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ತಗೊಂಡೋಗಿ ನಮ್ಮೂರೊಳಗೆ ಅಂತ್ಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ನಾವು ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂತ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ.
The pain of those who have lost a loved one to COVID-19 would only be worsened by an endless wait at a crematorium. The Karnataka government is now in the process of identifying land on the outskirts of cities and villages to be used as emergency cremation grounds. The sad reality of life in this, the pandemic era. With DM Kumar, Maya Sharma in Bengaluru for NDTV.
And from Bengaluru to Delhi, it is the same story everywhere. Nigambodh Ghat in the national capital is getting COVID bodies non-stop. And look at those visuals over there where constantly some part or the other is burning. At least 12 bodies were still waiting when this video was shot.
At one of Delhi's largest cremation grounds, Nigambodh Ghat, I come to you from here to tell you that more and more people are dying to COVID. We are losing more and more people. The national capital reported its highest COVID deaths just yesterday with 277. India reported its highest deaths today with over 2,000 COVID deaths. But these are not mere statistics, remember. Speaking to somebody who works at the cremation ground, आपसे जानना चाहूँगी, स्थिति इतनी गंभीर हो चुकी है कि बहुत सारे शमशान घाट, क्रेमेटोरियम, ग्रेवयार्ड में वेटिंग लाइन है, क्यों है, ऐसा क्यों है?
क्योंकि कहीं जगह नहीं है वो, इसलिए अब इतनी बड़ी बीमारी लोग कहाँ जाएंगे, सोचने वाली बात है, यहीं आएंगे।
और यहाँ पे सबसे बड़ा शमशान घाट, हाँ, दिल्ली का सबसे बड़ा शमशान घाट है। यहाँ पे कैसा प्रोसेस कैसा है अभी इन हालातों में, क्योंकि यहाँ पे दिन में भी जो होता है, लेकिन शाम को भी और रात में भी हो रहा है, क्रिमेशन हो रहा है। 24 बारे में बताइए।
24 आवर्स होता है। अब इतनी बॉडीज है, इतना इन्फेक्शन है, बॉडी को हॉस्पिटल में नहीं रख सकते, घर में नहीं रख सकते, तो एटलीस्ट कहीं तो करना ही पड़ेगा। तो लोग आते हैं, हम करते हैं, सबका काम कराते हैं, एडजस्ट कहीं ना कहीं करते हैं, बाहर भी अंदर भी, नीचे जमुना किनारे पे भी।
लेकिन जैसे कहा था हिंदू रिवाज, हिंदू इसमें बोला जाता है कि सनसेट के बाद, धूप ढलने के बाद नहीं किया जाता क्रियाक्रम, अंतिम संस्कार, लेकिन वो भी हमें देखने को मिल रहा है यहाँ पे, क्योंकि ज़्यादा वेट नहीं कर सकते लोग।
ऐसा इसलिए क्योंकि इन्फेक्शन आपको पता है इतना ज़्यादा हो चुका है, तो उसे ओपन नहीं रख सकते, हॉस्पिटल्स में भी इतनी जगह नहीं है, तो इसलिए इमरजेंसी में करना पड़ता है और कर ही रहे हैं।
और पिछले कुछ दिनों में स्थिति इतनी गंभीर हो चुकी है कि हॉस्पिटल में भी जगह नहीं है, मेडिसिन भी नहीं मिल रहा है। जैसे कि आप देख रहे हैं पीछे द शॉट्स बिहाइंड मी, एज यू कैन सी COVID deaths and all the families saying a final goodbye from a distance, which is unusual of course, but a very difficult time. So बस आपसे एक आखिरी सवाल, पिछले कुछ दिनों में आप लोगों ने ऐसा क्या किया है जो थोड़ा प्रोसेस को स्मूथ किया जा सकता है फैमिलीज के लिए?
जितना हमसे पॉसिबल हम उतना कर रहे हैं,
जैसे कि
बॉडीज को कंटिन्यू
24 hours. So that's what he's saying, that they're trying to they've made this a 24/7 cremation ground so that at least families can come and go ahead with the final rites. With camera person Prem Singh, Shanakshi Chakravarti for NDTV.
Welcome back. Now the Election Commission has written back to the Trinamool Congress who had asked for clubbing of the last phases of elections in West Bengal, saying that it is simply not feasible. No clubbing of the phases in Bengal. That's what Election Commission has written to TMC. This is as Bengal recorded over 10,700 cases in the past 24 hours, the biggest ever spike in daily cases. Kolkata also reported its biggest spike with over 2,500 cases. Yashwant Sinha made that clear on Twitter, saying that Mamata had requested the Election Commission to merge phase 6, 7 and 8 to prevent COVID. EC has now rejected her request. There is no doubt now that the BJP, Modi, Shah and the Election Commission are super spreaders of the COVID and doing it shamelessly. All right, let's move on now. And for the first time, the government has come out with data on infections after vaccination. The Union Health Ministry said today that it had data on COVID infections after vaccination, but there was, in fact, very small in number. Look at that. Positive cases after the first and the second dose. 0.04% in the case of Covaxin, 0.03% in the case of Covishield. This clearly is the good news of the day, as data suggesting that the vaccines in India are clearly working and preventing from death.
2 to 4 per 10,000 breakthrough infections have occurred after vaccination, which is a very small number, and this is because of the healthcare workers and the frontline workers, which were the first to be vaccinated, and they are prone to more occupational exposure, and vaccination should continue. The second point is that the current highly transmissible second wave may also contribute little bit, or minuscule, to this percentage. Otherwise, this could have been even 0%.
Let's shift our focus to pricing of these vaccines now. And NDTV spoke with Adar Poonawala regarding why there was difference in prices, say when Covishield is giving it to states, which is 400 rupees a dose, versus private hospitals who would be giving it for 600 rupees a dose. This is what he said.
Once you do ramp up production, at what rate will you be producing Covishield? And in the interim period, what is the rate that you are providing Covishield at?
As I have said, it's a fixed rate of Covishield to the central government of 150 rupees, and then to the state governments it's higher, and to the private hospitals it's even higher.
In fact, Adar Poonawala saying that India is still making the cheapest drugs, where in America it's over 1,500, Russia is over 750 rupees, and Chinese vaccines also over 750 rupees. But the opposition clearly not convinced.
लगता है ये सारी की सारी घटनाक्रम को देख करके कुछ 4-5 चीजें शुरू में मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि वैक्सीन लीडर जो इंडिया था, वैक्सीन लीडर हैज बीन रिड्यूस्ड टू वैक्सीन बेगर। मोदी जी ने एक मजबूत देश को मजबूर देश बना दिया। रादर देन टेस्टिंग कोरोना पॉजिटिव पेशेंट, गवर्नमेंट इज टेस्टिंग द पीपल्स पेशेंट्स। कोरोना के पॉजिटिव टेस्ट तो लोगों के पेशेंट्स के हो ही नहीं रहे, लेकिन लोगों की सब्र का इम्तिहान ये सरकार ले रही है।
Meanwhile, Covaxin has 78% efficacy. That's what the centre has said. This was a long-awaited phase 3 trial result, which has now finally come out, done by ICMR and Bharat Biotech. Also, they had participants, over 25,000 in this case, and 78% efficacy, but 100% for severe cases is what they have reported. And Remdesivir will be now allocated to 19 states and union territories. The government has allocated supply for Remdesivir to 19 states with high burden of cases coming up. Manufacturers have been mapped to states to smoothen the supply chain. And also the national regulator is to monitor the movement and demand of this drug. Just a quick note over there, Remdesivir is no magic drug really, will not save you from death, but is one which only works in very limited cases. Well, with that, it's a wrap. Stay safe. Good night.